All the Difference is the teaching ministry of Dr. Wayne Braudrick and the lead pastor of Frisco Bible Church. In the Bible Place series, we will seek to uncover the significance of the times and locations of the biblical events to help you understand and engage with the scriptures. In today's episode, we travel to the Jordan River and explore the background and meaning of baptism. And here we go. And to start with this, I actually want to go back a little bit and talk about all the difference and what it is. So, Wayne, what is all the difference?
Okay. Wow, that's a good question. Okay, so I have for years been, because teaching, what I do, is not just for information, it's to change lives. I didn't come up with that. An old teacher of mine, Howard Hendricks, was the first one I ever heard use that, and I'm sure he didn't come up with it either. But teaching is to change lives, so it's to make all the difference, to let Scripture make all the difference in someone's life. So when I got approached and asked about teaching on radio, which I thought was a joke, ended up it actually was very productive, but I assumed everybody was like me and only listened to sports talk radio, so I didn't think anybody would do it. They said, "No, this is going great. We want to do this. What are you going to call the show?" And this is so funny. This just happens. This is where it is on the shelf. But Robert Frost, maybe the greatest American poet, one of them, underappreciated, such depth in what he's doing. But his road less traveled, he has the great line at the end, I took the road less traveled, and that has made all the difference. So we called it All the Difference in honor of Mr. Frost. And not really, but because of what the Scripture does in lives. And then we got on the radio and had all these people that were writing and engaging in the Scripture. And anyway, one thing led to another, and it was great fun, enjoyed it for years. Now that we have many people that study with us around the world through the church's preaching broadcast, there wasn't as much need for the radio show. So what we've done is we've taken that radio show that was short and expanded it to this long format, and we're going to dive into place.
I am really excited about that. That actually brings me to my next question. What was it that sparked your interest in the sense of place?
So a good question. Almost 20 years ago, one of my old friends, one of my old professors, came out with a book on place and spatial understanding of life with God. And I didn't like it. Sorry, that's terrible. I won't say who he is because I love him, but I didn't like the book. And it had some good points in it, but that led me into an investigation of where did this parts I didn't like come from. And where they came from was something called the spatial turn. Okay, this is you ready for a rabbit hole here?
Yeah.
Okay. So in late 20th century sociology and human geography, there were a number of people, Lefebvre and others, I won't bore you with who they are, but they began this investigation into place in a different way. And they began to look at places throughout history, throughout the world, in a sense of a different sense than what we had approached. And there's a lot of it that's good. There's a lot of it that's really useful. And in fact, if you've got kids right now in high school geography, they're being influenced by what those people did 35, 40 years ago. And again, a lot of it's good. Some of it is full of some pretty heavy assumptions that don't gel with the Bible well. A biblical word there. They're especially Marxist. There is no God. There is no good. People who are in charge are almost always bad. I mean, it just there's a number of things that don't. They're just not logical. They don't work well. So set that aside, right? So I think about that, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird and kind of cool, and it's a mixed bag, like many things on this earth. And then you fast forward to a couple of years ago, probably 3 years ago. One of my older friends, who is now head of the Kirby Lang. He's in charge of biblical studies for the Kirby Lang Center in Cambridge, UK.
Okay.
He was working on a dissertation, and he sent me this doctoral dissertation. In UK, they call it a thesis That's very confusing, by the way. We call it a dissertation. They call a master's paper a dissertation. Anyway.
Well, they spell words differently too. So
They did do it first. Anyway, but I like our way. So he sent me this thing and said, I'd really like your opinion on this. And I started reading it, and I understood very little of what was there. And I thought, okay, well, I'm a dummy, and this is fun. I get to learn something new. So as I started doing, what I had to do was I had to go check out all the books he's referencing to figure out what in the world he's talking about. And that allowed me to make some hopefully helpful comments, which is what he wanted. But I learned a whole lot. Whatever he got out of my input was much less than what I got out of it. And what I got out of it was, oh my goodness, this ties back into that old Lefebvre stuff, the spatial turn stuff. Oh, it all comes together. So I began to play around with that and look at that and dialogue with him. And we met a few times. And I said, look, okay, now I can articulate what I didn't like about that. And you're applying that to the Bible. He's like, yeah. So a year ago, he came out with a really great book called The Place of God at the Bookends of the Bible. And it's brilliant. And he goes Genesis and Revelation, and he shows the whole Bible is in some way encapsulated by the idea that God was making a place to engage with humanity here. It was corrupted. He remakes a place to forever engage without corruption with humanity here. And you need to, if you're going to understand the Bible, you got to understand that. And he did palatial work. It's just fantastic. It's a great book. It's not an easy read, but I'm sure that everybody listening is much wiser than I, and they can figure it out more quickly than I had to. But and it's written for a more accessible audience. But anyway, so that led to a lunchtime where Dr. Larson, now Dr. Larson, David, said, hey, what do you think about writing a book on place and the Bible in general? I said, you've already done it. And he said, no. Not specific like that, but just going through. So anyway, I took a year and labored through, and apparently it's at the editor, which it's been there forever, which tells you something. Anyway, but is going to be published wonderfully by a big publisher, supposedly in the next few months, and it's an introduction to how to do biblical place. So
cool.
You don't have to read the book while you're mowing your lawn and listening to us. You can just listen every day. And what we're going to do in this podcast is we're going to go through, I don't know, as many of the books of the Bible as we can get through, and hit all the places and do the practice of biblical place. And which I need to explain what that is now that I've let all that up. So
I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with John 1 today. As he said, we're going to go to the Jordan River. But let's back up on biblical place. So when I think of place, I think of geography. I think of location, which is totally valid. I grew up as a child of the late Enlightenment. You and I both grew up at a time, everyone listening to us grew up at a time when GPS and location is really, and it is really important. And by the way, our forebears, before the Great Transit and the Great Arc and some of the other things that allowed us to, these are books you can read that are fascinating, but before we began to understand how to really delineate exactness of location, people didn't think only in terms of location. They did, but that was much less important than locale and sense of place. So those three together make up place: location, locale, sense of place. And the sad part is we've spent so many years enmeshed in location, which is great, that we don't even think in terms of locale and sense of place unless we really work at it. And that's a problem when I approach the Scripture, because the Scripture assumes that I am going to be understanding locale and sense of place. So location matters. So everybody goes up to Jerusalem. You and I have been there.
Yeah.
That's because it's thousands of feet up above everything around it. And so you literally go up. That's helpful to understand when I'm reading the text. Oh, they're walking uphill right now. that helps me understand the movement. Jesus was going from Jericho to Jerusalem. It's not the passage we're going to do today, but in another passage, he's walking uphill, and it's not a straight shot. So location matters, but locale matters because that tells me about the infrastructure and the ideas and the political system that is part of that. So when Jesus, for example, is going from Jericho to Jerusalem, he is moving into the heart of his enemy's territory, their system, their way of thinking. It's very different.
So would locale encapsulate more the idea of culture?
Culture and infrastructure.
Okay.
So when you read Jericho, for example, Jericho has a lot of palm trees. The city of the palms is what the name means, but it did not have, at least in the first century, it didn't have Roman running water. It wasn't like Masada, which had a sewer system and running water. It wasn't like Jerusalem, which had public baths outside of the Jewish areas where they weren't allowed, but for religious reasons. But it was a very different place. And when you read those places in your Bible, it's assumed that you're thinking in those terms. So we're going to try and help people think in those terms. Sense of place is very different. Sense of place is, what did it feel like to those people at that time and place? So we're sitting in Frisco, Texas right now, our wonderful town here. When I moved to Frisco, Texas, let's just use this example. I volunteered at the local library, which had just opened, and it was all of books that a bunch of us donated, because our town was 6,000 people. I mean, I know, isn't that funny?
It's grown just a little bit since then.
What is it, 250,000 now?
It's over 200.
It's over 200,
It's over
sure,
200,
yeah. So there were 6,000 people, and that was 1991. And the library was part of a tiny little complex that some business someone had tried to build that had gone out of business, and the city ended up with it, and the city said, "Hey, y'all can use this space right here for the library," and they were wonderful people, but that is how they spoke, and it was great. There was old North Texas accent, and so we established this library, and I was the storyteller. On Saturdays, I showed up and read
That makes
stories.
all the sense in the world.
Oh, we had a blast. Yeah. So we read the Chronicles of Narnia. I mean, let's deal with what matters.
Of course.
Right? Yeah.
So Frisco's over 235,000.
Is that what? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, and that's in 34 years.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So Frisco then, that library, we ended up taking over another part of it that was the city jail, which had a cell. And we took that part over, and that became the library, and that gives you a sense of that library. Just me telling you that, you get a sense of what it was like to go to that library and to sit and listen to this very young guy read Chronicles of Narnia. Right? That gives you a sense of place. The library then moves because we built. George Purefoy was the only city manager Frisco had until last year, and he's a friend, and he's an amazing, godly man. And George led the city very, very well. They built this massive city complex building, the George Purefoy Municipal Center. And we made up a fake downtown. So when all of you come to Frisco, as everybody seems to, and it's wonderful, when you come to see the FC Dallas soccer team, or the Frisco Rough Riders or the Dallas Stars or the Dallas Cowboy Center or whatever, go to downtown. That's not the old real downtown. The old real downtown is a wonderful, junky little place on Main Street. This is off of Main Street, and they built this wonderful fake downtown. And this, how many stories is that? 4 stories, 5 stories municipal building. Is it like 4, right? So they, half of it is city offices, and half of it is this library. And I mean, it was amazing. You've been in that?
Oh, yeah. We went from a little room in a jail cell to housing T-Rex.
Oh, no, this is the one before that.
The older one.
Yeah,
okay.
So
which was also awesome.
It was awesome. Had
Yeah.
these beautiful spaces to sit and study, had a cool teen room that you had to get permission to go in to read, because the best books are teen fiction, let's be honest. And I had to ask permission to go in there. I'm not a teenager. Anyway, they let me. And they're professional. I mean, they have paid people here now. It's
Yeah.
not just volunteers running this place, and they have storytellers that are real. And anyway, so
Yeah.
it's a whole different sense of place. I mean, there are people there all the time, hundreds of people. And then the city kept growing. And the city government decided we need more space. And the library said we need more space, which sounds absurd to us, but it's true.
Yeah.
And there was an old building on the Dallas North Tollway, which now comes through Frisco. Amazing. And this huge road. And it was where a guy named Beale tried to do an aerospace company at the same time that Elon Musk was doing SpaceX. And Musk won and Beale didn't. So the city got this building for nothing. And they cleared out all the jet fuel. And I'm kidding. and it's huge. How many square feet?
Oh, I can't remember. It's big enough for a T-Rex to just hang out in the center.
There is a full-size T-Rex skeleton in the middle, and it doesn't even get close to the ceiling.
No.
And there's a beautiful, big, quiet room where I write books, and it's silent, and you have these footstools and this wonderful lamps and plugs and everything. And it is massive and wonderful, and there are thousands of people there every day. So we went from dozens to hundreds to thousands. That has a totally different sense of place than the one before it did. And so if you said Frisco Library, like let's suppose you're reading something that says, we went to the Frisco Library. Well, you would want to know at what time period are we talking about, because the sense of place is totally different, right? Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, when you get to the Bible and you read Lachish, well, Lachish is very different in 1000 BC than it is in 1500 BC, than it is in 500 AD. That it's a very different place. The sense of place is that location didn't change. And if you don't think in terms of sense of place, like us, we just think in terms of location, you're not going to get everything the Bible's telling you. So does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense. And actually, even now, you go to Israel and around to other archaeological sites, and you go to the tells. And there's one tell in Israel that's, is it 30 civilizations deep? That
Megiddo,
hasn't even been uncovered completely yet.
No.
And so each of those eras is going to be different depending on who was there and what was going on.
Right.
That's really interesting.
The thing, as I began to ferret out what was bothering me, the thing that was problematic is people were taking this idea of sense of place. Not so much locale or location, but sense of place. And they were, this is kind of cruel, but they were kind of making the Bible mean whatever they wanted it to mean. Mm-hmm. And you can abuse that pretty badly. On the other hand, people from kind of the other theological side of the persuasion, they had a tendency to do fairly sloppy history. And just you find something and you just say, oh, it was like this, and you plop it into any setting without some real scholarly thought. So one of the classic is that, oh no, in the first century, a Jewish woman was the lowest form of humanity, and every Jewish man got up every morning and said, thank God I'm not a Gentile or a Jew. That's not true. There's absolutely no substance for that. There is in the 6th century AD, in Sephardic Spain, a totally different sense of place, totally different culture, and to drag that and anachronistically plop it down is a real mistake when every document we have from the 1st century shows that women could divorce at will, own a business, keep products when they just an example. Boy, we'll get mail on that one. I shouldn't use that example. Anyway, but that's what happens. It's bad history. And so what we're going to try and do is help everybody learn, and we learn along with you, how to do good history and how to do location, locale, sense of place. There are 4 tools we use to do that.
Okay.
All right, here we go. And this is where it gets complex. Okay. And this is why it took me so long to learn this. That was the easy
whole
stuff.
Setup was all simple.
That's the easy
okay,
stuff.
Good.
Yeah, there's nothing to it. So just remember location, locale, sense of place. And then to dive into location, locale, sense of place, you use 4 spaces. Probably not the best terms in the world, but it's what those spatial turn people got accepted in academia, and so now we're kind of stuck with it. So
Well, does it make sense?
yeah,
Like,
it does. I think you'll see. Tell me what you
Yeah.
think. Okay, so first space is architecture. It's infrastructure. So it's a way to handle location and locale. What is the infrastructure? What's going on there? Not
Okay.
the culture side of locale, but you're just dealing with the. So the people that talk about first space a lot tend to be architects, city planners, and that matters because that's going to impact how you understand a place. Second, so that's first space. Second space is what is the dominant view, and here we're getting to culture and sense of place. So locale and sense of place. What's the dominant way of life? So in Frisco, most people are wealthy now, right, which is hilarious because I legitimately moved here because it was the only place anywhere close to where I was teaching that I could afford to buy a house. That's funny. I mean, that's hilarious, isn't it? And so the sense of place changed a lot. So second space, I think about what was Frisco like in 1991 in second space versus what is it like now. It was very different. We don't have many city employees talk like that no more. They're all educated people.
and we're from all over the place
and they're
now.
from everywhere.
I'm not from here.
Right.
Yeah. There's a lot of people who, actually, most people I know who are not originally from Frisco, Texas. Most
Or
people
even
have
Texas.
come here from somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And greatly from all over the world.
Yeah.
Not just America. Third space is what is it like for the other, and this one's very interesting. So the dominant minority in Frisco, where we live now, are Indians. No, I'm a Native American, not my kind of Indian, the other kind from the
India.
subcontinent. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like my neighbor right there, and my neighbor right there, and the one 3 houses that way. That's and they're wonderful neighbors. We enjoy growing, but it looks different to them than it does to me because they're other. English is they're incredibly proficient, the ones that live here, but it is not for most of them their first language. That matters. When I lived in Germany, I loved Germany. I loved the camp I worked at. I loved everything about it. But it was a different sense of place for me because I was other. I saw it with different eyes. Ever tell you about the shaving issue in Germany?
No.
Okay. So my best buddy Mike and I are working at the camp. And we arrive there and we meet our staff. He's gifted woodworker. He's going to do this construction stuff. I'm going to lead some program things for the camp, help them learn some new things and me learn new things. So we arrive and we get bunked in. We meet our staff, and they're just the most godly, committed believers. They're just precious. I mean, hardworking. They were awesome. A number of the female staff were from, please do not be offended by this, our friends in Germany. It's just fact, okay? They're from the countryside, smaller towns around Germany. And in their culture, they don't shave their armpits. And it's summer camp, and so everybody's got, like short sleeve shirts or tank tops or whatever, or bathing suits or whatever. And there's just this big thing. So Mike and I, like the second or third night we're there, this is very early. We've got beds facing each other in our little apartment. And we looked at each other and said, I said something like, okay, about the armpit hair. And he said, we are guests in this culture. We cannot let ourselves come in with a judgmental point of view. We're here to serve. And so we need to absorb, we didn't have this term, but we need to absorb the third space as an other. And this is their space. What do we learn from it? And so what we did was we said, we will not mention this to each other for 1 week. And a week later, we'll come back, and then we'll see how it looks to us. So we come back a week later, and he said, hey, you know what? It's been a week. We talk about the underarm. I said, oh, okay. Kid you not. At the exact same moment, there was a silence, and at the same moment, both of us said, it's wrong. It's just wrong. It's so gross. It's just wrong. Just wagged our heads. Isn't that awful? We were just, and then we felt guilty. We were like, but it's wrong. It's just gross. Anyway,
But that's something. As Americans, we're so used to one way.
Right.
You go to another culture,
Right.
it's another way. They don't They don't have an issue with that.
No.
That's how they've grown up. That's their culture. That's their space.
So in Frisco, for example, as I got to know one of my neighbors really well, he was just horrified that we don't go for a walk after dinner every night because they eat very spicy or savory foods, and it leads to gas. And it is the ultimate insult to pass gas in the house.
No, I would offend my wife constantly.
I mean to talk to you about that. It's wrong. It's just, anyway, so he said, why don't you go walk? And I said, well, I eat, stuff that doesn't do that. But that's also not.
If we go to Taco Bell, we're going for a walk.
We go for a walk. Yeah, that's for sure. But suddenly I understood why all my Indian neighbors walk. That's third space. That's what the space is like for the other. The ones that are different. So different in a not different, but different in a positive sense. So and then fourth,
it's not wrong. It's just different.
It's just different, right? Yeah. Fourth space, except for yeah, right. Fourth space is future space. Future space. Some scholars now have started calling this cathedral space because it's the idea of how do you look at this space, this place. Something that's going to outlive you by a long time, and it's going to take a long time to build. Like a cathedral, which was never built in one generation or two or three. Yeah. So cathedral space is future space. And by the way, my friend Dr. Larson, that's his expertise. He writes a lot about that, and I understand some of it. It's really good. So location, locale, sense of place. Well, how do we dig into those? We don't just make up whatever we want. We use the tools of first space, second space, third space, fourth space. If you're taking notes at home, that would be architecture, infrastructure is first space. Second space is the dominant way of thinking, way of life, the culture, the government, the people groups. Third space is the other. Let's look at it again from the thought of the other, which comes in a lot in the Bible, particularly for the Hebrews, who tend to be in the other position a lot. Sure. And then the fourth is future space. So, if you want to dive in, we can take our text for today, and you get to read it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We are going to start now that we have that background, which is that's super good.
Cool.
So we're going to start with John 1. And go verses 19 through 28. We're talking about John baptizing people.
Yeah.
So here it is from the CSB Bible.
Okay.
This was John's testimony when the Jews from Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him, "Who are you?" He didn't deny it, but confessed, "I am not the Messiah." "What then?" they asked him. "Are you Elijah?" "I am not," he said. "Are you the prophet?" "No," he answered. "Who are you then?" they asked. "We need to give an answer to those who sent us. What can you tell us about yourself?" He said, "I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, 'Make straight the way of the Lord,' just as Isaiah the prophet said." Now, they had been sent from the Pharisees, so they asked him, "Why then do you baptize if you aren't the Messiah or Elijah or the prophet?" "I baptize with water," John answered. "Someone stands among you, but you don't know him. He is the one coming after me, whose sandal strap I'm not worthy to untie." All this happened in Bethany across the Jordan, where John was baptizing.
All right. So let's go first space.
All right, first space. Architecture, location.
Yep, architecture and location. So he talks about Jerusalem, right? So Jerusalem in the New Testament. This book is out of print, so I know there'll be no copyright problem with showing it. Excellent book, by the way, Barry Beitzel, Moody, Atlas of Bible Lands. So New Testament Jerusalem. Okay, so you've got the temple complex here. That's really critical. That's the power center for the people who. Yeah, it's Masters Week when we record this, so we're using our Masters golf classes. Yes, very awesome. Yep. From 2015 when I got to go with my dad, thanks to a great friend. So this is Jerusalem. The Kidron Valley is right here. Down here is the original Davidic city, which is being uncovered as we speak. You've been there more recently than I, and
It's awesome.
there's new stuff every day.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The Pool of Siloam was not where we thought it was, maybe.
No, that's been excavated now too, even further.
Even further.
Yeah.
So it was bigger. There's all kinds of stuff going on.
it's awesome.
So the Hinnom Valley, which is where the earliest peoples, the Jebusites, burned their trash. So it got this name that means place of burning, or literally hell, Hinnom. And so that's Jerusalem. Okay, there's a location and a little bit of the locale, the infrastructure. So if we think about that now, we're in the 1st century AD, right? So we're roughly 30 AD, for want of a better term.
Yep.
And or a better time. And there's a sophistication there that you can't see on a map. The Roman government was crushingly autocratic, but it also was incredibly wealthy. People who lived within, as these people did, within the circuit of the Roman government had an average lifespan of 70 years. That included infant mortality. That included wars. That every 70 years. That had never, as far as we can tell, that had never been a part of any civilization ever up to that. And by the way, after the 4th century AD, it would never be seen again until modern America and Europe in the 20th century finally got back to a lifespan of 70 years.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you have to think about that if you're going to understand this place. Okay, this is a place where people live. It's sophisticated. So this is a digger that is an acquaintance of mine digging in that lower city that we talked about down south. He found this tear jar, and he couldn't give it to a museum or anything. Couldn't sell it because it was broken. It was so sad. It broke when they were getting it out. Oh, it's heartbreaking. But I never cleaned it because I wanted to keep it in situ, and we glued it back together. But this is a Roman glass. See, that's Roman glass tear jar right there.
That's awesome.
And yeah, one of the neat gifts I've ever been given. It's really cool. This is I like this particular image because this captures the infrastructure a little bit of the place. It's Roman. This is glass. Other people didn't do glass. Glass is very expensive, and it's not now with modern processes, but it was expensive and difficult. But this is not a Roman thing. Tear jars are very Semitic. Only the Jews and some other peoples did them, and it was a place where you would symbolically gather your tears, which is why it's such a huge deal in Psalm 46 when God's talking about his beloved, his people, and he says, I gather your tears in my jar.
Yeah.
I mean, it actually moves me to tears because the God of the universe loves me so much. These were very individual. You didn't use anyone else's. So your man's going off to war, you would cry into your tear jar. But they were wooden or pottery for centuries.
Yeah.
And then the Romans come along and suddenly have the same thing, but now it's glass. So that's to give a little sense of what we're dealing with in the 1st century. The Jordan River, you mentioned the Jordan River. This is important too. In terms of location and architecture, the Jordan is... It's different than the other major river, and it's not a major river, but it is for that part of the world. It's different than the others. So the Tigris and Euphrates, they're wild. Those rivers, they come and go. There are some historians who really think the reason the Mesopotamian gods are so different than the Egyptian gods, who were developed about the same time period, is the Tigris and Euphrates are absolutely unpredictable, like the gods, and
that makes sense.
Sumer. And the Egyptian gods are very stable and predictable, like the Nile. There's Nilometers we have from thousands of years ago, and they show the flood, and it's different, but it's very stable, and it brings new silt and new places to grow crops, and it's very stable. Euphrates and Tigris, you didn't build anything beside that unless you had the wealthiest kingdom ever, the old kingdom of Babylon, and you built a city right across it just to show how awesome you were. But that wasn't done. It was going to wipe you out, right? But they built dams and they held it off. The Jordan's in between the two. It's unpredictable. It does flood. I mean, I've been there when it was flooding. It's really frightening. But it's not like it's not like the Mississippi flooding in the Midwest, where I grew up. It's not. It doesn't stretch where you look for miles. It's more predictable than Tigris Euphrates. It's wilder than the Nile. It's in between.
Okay.
So you want to have that in mind, especially because later John's going to move to a different baptism site, and it's probably because there wasn't enough water in the Jordan at that point. So interesting. And then you mentioned Bethany beyond the Jordan. Did that come up in that text? I think it did. Says he was baptizing at Beit Bara or whatever it was called.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so Bethany beyond the Jordan, it's from Hebrew words that mean house of the poor. It was a tiny village. It's got some pretty old archaeological digs there. It seemed to have existed before the Israelites, but we don't know under what name. By the time Jesus is walking there and John's there, it was called Bet Bara. The most famous map in the world that you and I have seen, the Madaba map. By the way, we'll tie Frisco in here. So the Madaba map, they built a church over this incredible map. I mean, there was a monastery there, but they later made a church to protect it.
Yeah.
It's a 6th century map that shows, we think, every church in the Mediterranean basin at that point. It's a historical, it's also a beautiful work of art.
It's incredible.
It's incredible, but it takes up the floor of this church.
Yeah.
So I was on my way there, and I bumped into the former mayor of Frisco when he was still mayor. And he said, "Hey, where are you going to teach this week? I heard you're going somewhere." And I said, "Well, I'm going to Jordan." I said, "Wait a minute. Didn't you grow up in Jordan?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Wait, are you going to have people go teach? Are you going to go show people the Medaba map?" He said it in the modern Jordan Medaba.
Uh-huh.
And I said, "Yeah, why?" He said, "I was a choir boy in that church." What? Isn't that wild?
That's crazy.
Maher Maso.
It is such a small world.
Yes, I know. And his name's Maher, but he was the mayor, so it was a little confusing. Mayor Maher. Anyway, Maso was a choir boy in St. George's Church. But
Wow.
Anyway, I know he studies with us, so hi, Maher, we're glad to see you. So here is a little picture that I grabbed, and I don't think I have any copyright problems here because I took this. So this is Bet Bara right here. And in this Madaba map, it's there's not even a building. So what this is saying is in the 5th century, there was a church there, but they didn't have a building. They were meeting in the local elementary school and setting their stuff up. I'm kidding.
Sure.
But really, nothing changes, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. And these ones that have buildings, the building size tells you the size of the church and of the people there.
Okay.
That's why the map's so amazing. But this is Bet Bar. So it's right here on the east side of the Jordan River, very close to the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah.
They're beautifully done.
That's amazing.
Man, they do mosaics
It
so
really
well.
is cool. I can't wait to go see it again.
Now, you may bump into this in some of your reading people as you're looking at this, and you go, "Ooh, I'm going to Google Bet Bara. Okay, I want to know what that is." Awesome. Great place to start. You're going to read that it's considered the place where Elijah ascended into heaven, and went on his fiery chariot in a tornado, which is pretty awesome. And it makes me think of the Rich Mullins song. Remember that one? When I leave, I want to go out like Elijah. There's no way to know that. I cannot find any attestation of that before the 2nd century AD. So when you're talking about something that happened 500 years before Christ and your only attestation to it is 200 years after, just hold it loosely. Okay?
So that would be another example of according to tradition.
Yes.
Somebody at some point said, this is probably the
Right.
spot, and then somebody else picked that up, and they're
Right.
like, oh, this is definitely the place.
Right.
And it just kind of grows by
Yeah.
word of mouth and gets passed down.
What's so funny is sometimes we are blessed to get to do the work and we find out, well, you know what? That is very likely.
Yeah.
And other times you realize you do the work and you find out, oh, somebody owned land there. And he said, hey, pilgrims, come here. And so you got to, this one, I can't find any way to do the work to find out. So just hold it loosely.
Yeah.
In Bet Bara, this is very interesting and really important for understanding the story. So we're talking about first base, about infrastructure, right? There is an old mikveh there, and it's an old one. It probably, there's no way to tell for sure, but probably was in operation at the time John's baptizing there. But he's not baptizing in a mikveh. In fact, what he's doing is very different. So Jared's taught in Israel a number of times, and he's going to tell us what a mikveh is and what does that mean?
Mikvahs are holes in the ground, for lack of a better term. They would dig these holes, and mikvah literally means gathered water. This is a place where people would come and do their ritual bathing and ritual cleansing, because Yahweh gave his people detailed regulations about things that would make them unclean. Right. I actually just read this in my personal reading. I'm reading through Leviticus right now. Oh. It's super exciting. It's just it's really interesting to go back and see, because there were a number of things that would make them unclean. Yeah. And then they would bathe in water, and it was full submersion. You get in all the way and you get clean, and then you had to wait a certain number of days before you would be declared clean. And at that time in Leviticus, when it was given, they were traveling people, so there were no places that they could just go. Right. So in the 2nd century BC, now they're established, they're in this land, and they started creating mikvahs. And it was a stepped down into a pool where they would submerge in water to become ritually clean. And these popped up all over the place. Yeah. There's tons of them around the temple site in Jerusalem. There's lots of them in people's own houses. The rich, wealthy people would have their own mikvahs. You would find them in towns and villages. They've discovered thousands of them all over the place.
Found one in eastern Dalmatia last year when I was just traveling for fun, and there was a Jewish diaspora there, but that was wild. Yeah. Very wealthy home. This would have been from the 6th century, 7th century AD. Anyway, they're everywhere.
There are these, and there's no real regulations to them. They don't have to be a certain size. Some had steps just going in, some had steps going in and out. I found something that said, according to the religious leaders later on, they had to hold a certain number of leaders in order to be considered a real mikveh. That's not in the Bible. That wasn't regulated at all. It was just something that was added later. But they really only needed to be large enough for people to be submerged. Yeah. So, but it's cool. You can go to Israel, you can go all over, and you can find these things everywhere.
Everywhere.
They're cool.
Yeah, they are. Only one I've seen in the States is in Brooklyn. And I know there's a couple of them there, but there was one that I happened to see, and they were very kind and let me look at. But there were no it's almost exclusively used by women because of the period, the 30-day cycle purification, 28-day. Please don't write me. I know it matters. I can't remember.
That's okay.
But the out-of-town guest, whatever you call it. So that's a mikveh. Now that is not the same as baptism. Okay, so when we think about baptism, there are baptismal pools at Beit Bara that are built alongside mikveh. That tells us they're different. What John's doing is different, and that takes us to second space. Okay, so in second space, we're dealing with the dominant sense of place, the locale. What is it like for the normative people that live there? All right, so it mentioned Jerusalem. Let's go to Jerusalem. What was Jerusalem like? Well, it's the headquarters of the Sanhedrin. And what was the Sanhedrin?
The religious ruling authority.
Yep. And they oversaw, even under Rome's boot, Rome allowed them the complete freedom over religious issues. So they managed their religion. The priests, and the text says it was priests, came to John. The priests were dominated by Pharisees. The Sanhedrin was dominated by Sadducees. The council is mentioned in this passage, and so are the priests. So we need to understand Sadducees and Pharisees. So there's so much to say about them, and you probably know much more than we, but I put together a little quick guide. So Sadducees are aligned with and supported by Roman power. So they said the way that they're rather like what the Russian Orthodox Church was like during the Cold War. The way we're going to survive is we're going to play with the power that's there and work under their authority just so so the church can continue.
So we don't get stamped out.
Right. And there were many who deeply disagreed with that, but that was the dominant thinking. So we're talking about dominant thinking. That's Sadducee thinking. They were very influential in the city of Jerusalem. That's their core place, especially the temple. We showed the temple complex there in the eastern side against the Kidron Valley. That was their that was, if they'd had an Under Armour, they would have had signs up with Sadducees saying, "This is our house, defend this house." So that was their house. The Sadducees accepted only Moses' books, and they were so theologically liberal that they really leaned toward atheism.
I want to go back to something really quick,
right.
because you said they're influential in Jerusalem.
Right.
And I'm trying to think of a story from the Gospels where the Sadducees are even mentioned outside of Jerusalem, and I've never thought of that before. I can't think of any story where Jesus is in Galilee or he is somewhere else where he has an interaction with the Sadducees.
I don't know. I can't think of one either. I mean, it'd be easy to check, pull up your logo software and see Sadducee, but I think you're probably right.
I think that's fascinating. I've never thought of that.
It certainly emphasizes the idea of we can't, if there's only one or two, then their authority was in.
Yeah.
And Josephus talks about that, a historian of the 7th decade AD. He talks about Sadducees in Jerusalem. So that was their place. I know that's a little bit rough to say they were leaning toward atheism, but when I read the things they write, they were like some liberal Christians today who call themselves Christians, but quite frankly, what they believe does not in any way line up with Scripture. And so the biggest thing that they made fun of was the idea of a resurrection. They weren't raw materialists like the new atheists of our day, but there's a parallel there. There's no resurrection. Okay, Pharisees, some on the council, but couldn't be more different, and they held a tense kind of power together. So Pharisees were aligned with and supported by common Jewish people. They got their income and their support from the Jewish people, not from Rome. And I think, based on what some of them have written, Gamaliel and others that we've got their writings, I think they were somewhat proud of that. They were influential in the synagogues. So while the Jews are in Babylonian captivity 500 years before this, they developed, it appears like it started there, as far as we can tell, they developed something that was brand new in all the world, a compulsory public education. Totally new. Nobody had ever done that before. Education happened at home, and the very gifted, some cultures had ways for them to be of use to the state and grow. But compulsory public, where everybody learns, they realized we're going to lose the Torah, we're going to lose the Scripture if we don't all know it. So everybody went to synagogue school. The Pharisees rise up somewhat in parallel with that, and by the time we get to the first century, it appears that they had a lot of influence through the synagogue schools. They were the teachers. Many of the rabbis, the great rabbis, were Pharisees. So they recognized all of the Old Testament writings, not just the 5 books of Moses, not just the Torah, and they were theologically conservative. They were so the others were so liberal. They were all atheism. These guys are so conservative that they're pretty legalistic, which is not scriptural.
No.
I mean, salvation has always been, since Genesis 15, by God's grace alone, through faith alone. The law is to show us that we need Christ. It's a tutor, as Paul puts it, to lead us to Christ. It's important. You keep it as a way to learn what your needs are and how holy God is, and it's wonderful. But they came to where they kind of took the pith out of classic legalism. Is you earn your way to heaven, which is every religion in the world, but not Scripture. And that's where they were. They did believe in a resurrection. So that's their difference. Okay, so Jewish leaders, mention our text, almost surely Sadducees. When it says priests and Levites, when you're reading this text, that's very likely Pharisees.
Yeah.
So John's got this well-rounded group coming to him from the capital. It's probably the only place in the world that could provide this kind of mix of people. So let's go now to the sense of place. Baptism. What are the Pharisees' concerns about? They questioned him about his baptism. Now, that needs a little explanation. For centuries, people have been going into mikvahs, ritual washing, right? That's cool. Individual practice, preparing myself before God, responding to his words. They're all over Jerusalem. But John's doing something different, right? So he's dunking people as an outward sign of an inward change. This is not purification. This is change. This represents a new internal way of living that is being shown in an external response. A few years before John started dunking people in the Jordan, there was a Roman poet named Ovid, and those of us that took Latin, he becomes everybody's favorite Roman poet because he's pretty sarcastic. So he writes a poem about, he's not actually talking about the Jews, he's talking about other cultures, but the same idea, that ritual purification is of limited use. So he writes, and I copied this down on my notes so I'd have it, nimium faciles qui tristia cribina cadis, fluminea tole posse putatis aqua, which means, how easy it is thinking grievous crimes and murders can be removed by running water. How easy it is thinking grievous crimes and murders can be removed by running water. He understood, people throughout the whole Mediterranean world understood, a heart change is different. That's what you really need. And an external application of water, that doesn't wash away anything. So baptism is supposed to reflect this internal change, and that's behind the Greek term. So when we read this in English, the Greek term we translated baptize is baptizo. The very first instance I can find anywhere in Greek literature of the word baptizo, which God had John use on purpose, is at Homer. It's in Homer, and it's talking about pickles. Seriously, it's describing how this substance was prepared. It was salt water, brine, and they took cucumbers and put the cucumbers in it, and later when they took them out, they were different. And the way he described the going in and coming out was, you're now a pickle, right? It's the opposite of Larry Boy in the old Veggie Tales.
Yeah, that's an
I'm
interesting...
a cucumber.
That's a cool metaphor.
It's cool, isn't it? I taught that one time at our church at Frisco Bible, and this lady had just come to faith in Christ, and she was so excited to be baptized. And when she showed up, the pastor that was in charge of baptisms, and he said, "You got to see this." And he called me back to the room where everybody gets ready, and she had on a shirt that had a pickle she had drawn on it. It was really well. She's a good artist. And it said, goodness. "I'm now a pickle." She was so excited. I've never forgotten that. So these new creatures are identifying with change. You're a pickle now. You're not a cucumber anymore. You're different. So identity is a big part of baptizo. You're not identifying with the brine or the water or anything else. It's something outside of you. It's something, a raw cucumber is going to become this. So it's very different from a mikveh. But I do need to say this. Be careful not to take things too far, because sometimes there were groups, and I don't find them anywhere in the first century, but later there were these people called the Manichaeans and the Nestorians. The Nestorians are mentioned in the book of Revelation, so they weren't too much later. They began to treat baptism as magic. Sprinkle some pixie dust on it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the saddest thing about the Manichaeans is they abused poor John the Baptizer and used him as their example. Oh, we can do magic and baptism like John did. Can you imagine his reaction to that? You're a brood of
probably would have
vipers.
just thrown him into the water and let him float down the river.
I think he would have. Yeah, that's right. So it's not magic. It's not mikveh. It's baptism. I copied down a really great German theologian from the early 20th century, Albrecht Oepke. And I had somebody else translate it, so I have confidence it's right. I didn't trust myself. He said, John's baptism is not that of the Mandeans. In the Nestorian ritual, that's the ones that are mentioned in the Bible, and in Mandean ritual, the strongest emphasis is on magical power. To them, every baptismal stream invested with heavenly fire by incantations counts as the Jordan. They used the baptizer as their example, but he would have seen this as an unbridgeable distinction from his identification, which was Jesus. So baptizo is identifying with God who has changed you internally. It's not magic power through incantations. It's not holy water. It may be, let's give them credit, it may be the Pharisees that go out to check, they're checking John's theology.
Yeah.
They may actually be saying, are you just doing a mikveh and call it, are you practicing magic? And it's neither. They want to know with whom he is identifying. Remember, it's about identity. And John says, I'm identifying with, what does he say? The Messiah who is near at hand. That's brilliant writing, isn't it? He's right here. Ooh, it's so exciting. I love that. Okay.
It's like the best movie trailer ever.
Ever in a world where so first base, that's the location, the architecture. Second space is what's it like for the dominant people. So Sadducees, Pharisees, those are the dominant people. How did they think? Third space is the experience of the other. There's not a lot of other in this passage except one thing. I would say this. In Jerusalem, as far as I can tell, the mikveh were only for Jews. And John tells us that the baptizer is welcoming everyone. Later, he's going to tell us huge crowds were coming out to him. And the word used for crowds is not just a Jewish, it's mixed. So, by the way, I don't think that would have bothered the religious council. It would have if it were a mikveh, but baptism's different, so he's not doing that. But that, I don't know for sure. That may be playing into the passage, third space, that this is... That certainly, I may be seeing that because I want to, because of Abraham's promise that all the world is going to be blessed through your offspring, and Jesus is the ultimate offspring of Abraham, and all the world's blessed through trust in him.
Does it help, you think? Does it help John in that relationship with the Sanhedrin that he's not in Jerusalem? He is down at the river, which is a long way away from Jerusalem. That's a hike.
That's a hike. That's a half a day's walk.
Does that help him in that regard?
I think so.
You think so?
I think so. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The water's cleaner up there. I mean, it doesn't matter.
True. Well, it's flowing water. It's not.
That's right.
It's not in a cistern. It's not still.
No, and baptisms were almost always conducted in living water. Living water is water that moves under its own power, and not in cistern water.
Yeah.
So, all right. So now, cathedral space, fourth space, what Dr. Larson calls future space. I don't know if that's going to catch on, but go for it, David. I like it. Future space. All right. Now, this is really critical to the passage, and this is inherent in the identity question. The Pharisees want to know, who are you? That's a future space question. And it helps us understand the sense of place. Everybody was looking for something. Ooh, that sounds like a country song, doesn't it? Everybody was looking for something. So they give three possibilities that have been bandied about. Edwin Blum, old professor, I never had him, but he was at Dallas Seminary. He had a really cool note on this. He said, interestingly, in response to their questions, John's answers were progressively shorter. I didn't really notice that in the text first time I read, I'm not the Christ, verse 20. I am not, verse 21. No, verse 21. I'm not the Christ, I am not, no. He didn't want to talk about himself. His function was to point to another, right? So, by the way, may that be true of us.
Yeah.
Amen. Okay, now John's questioners, the first thing we know is, are you the Messiah? And he said, I can't be. If you look at the context of John 1, he's divine. He's born of a virgin. He has a different lineage that fits the prophecy exactly. John, even though they're related, he's not any of those. So then they say, are you Elijah? Now, this one I do remember. I remember the first time I ever read this passage. I was a fairly new Christian, and an elder at our church said, you need to read John. And so I did, and my little living Bible that I'd gotten, it's really exciting and loving it. And I remember, I don't have that Bible anymore. I think I wrote in the margin, how weird are these guys? Or something like that. Because I was thinking that, because even I knew, as a new Christian, Elijah was taken to heaven 500 years before this. How could you think he's Elijah? I mean, people are crazy. And later I began to learn about the Bible, and I said, this isn't a strange question, because it turns out Malachi promised that Elijah would return before the great day of judgment. That's prophesied in the Bible. And spiritually, everything's moving to a head. This gives us a sense of place. The zeitgeist at the time, it was reasonable for them to ask, are you Elijah? That's a reasonable question. John's having massive impact. He's turning people to God, right? He's turning people to his word. He's moving families to reunite. In other words, he's doing exactly what we were told Elijah would do for Israel when he came back from the chariots of fire. Wouldn't it be cool, and who knows, it doesn't tell us how in Revelation, but wouldn't it be cool if John reappeared in a tornado, in a chariot of fire? Just, it would be so, we're in Texas, that would be so Texan,
It
you
would
know?
be.
Maybe even more Oklahoman, yeehaw, come on, that's just so cool. But John says what? What does he say? No, I'm not Elijah. And so what's the third thing they ask him? Are you the prophet? Okay, this one's a little weird. I think the prophet idea is a misunderstanding of Deuteronomy chapter 18. And most scholars would agree with that. God says through Moses that one day he's going to send a prophet whose function is going to be like Moses. He's going to establish a new people out of ones who were trapped in slavery. That was Moses' role. People trapped in slavery become a new people. And he says, okay, this is what we're going to do. There's this prophet who's going to be like you. For most of Hebrew history, in fact, everything that I can find up until maybe a couple hundred years before Jesus, everybody said, oh, Deuteronomy 18 is spiritual liberty that's going to be brought by the Messiah. They understood. They really did. The first century power brokers, thinking now about the dominant thinking, they said that's passé. We're looking for a prophet to lead us to physical freedom. In fact, there was a whole branch of Judaism called the Zealots who were all about this, and they believed this prophet. One of Jesus's disciples. Quick points. Which one? Do you know who it was? Simon the Zealot.
Yeah.
My friend Scott Arbuckle, who's a really gifted architect and loves this stuff. Scott's also he's illustrated a bunch of children's books, and he did some children's books with the disciples in them. And he was trying to he told me, I'm trying to think of how to do Simon the Zealot. And he showed me the picture he'd drawn. And he didn't know what to do, but it was awesome. This guy with big old eyes and his hair just sticking out everywhere. Simon the Zealot. Okay, so every period has nonsense, right? Show me a time period of history that does not have some kind of everybody accepted nonsense. I mean, early 20th century, that radiation water will make you healthy, right? That was a real thing. The early 21st century, sex is a human construct. You can just choose your own gender. No, you can't. That's absurd. In the first century, it became hip to imagine that Moses was not speaking about Messiah. There's some other character called a prophet. I don't know, and I don't know any way to find out, if that influenced Muhammad. I wonder if that is part. We know he studied with a number of Jews before he launched Islam. Mm-hmm. And it makes you wonder if he was influenced by that misguided understanding to call Jesus the highly regarded prophet and not the Messiah. Isn't that intriguing? Anyway, don't know. Okay, so a bit later in John, you got this kid Philip, right? One of John's writing, the book, not John the Baptizer. Mm-hmm. He's raised far away from the centers of power. Philip was raised in Galilee, and he understands better than the Pharisees and Sadducees in Jerusalem because he realized the Messiah is creating a far more significant spiritual people. And I won't spoil it for you. You can just look up what Philip says, and you'll see that he actually understands.
Yeah.
He gets it. Not all the time. He also fails a test that had to do with a little boy with loaves and fishes, but that's another topic for another day.
They all failed tests all the way
That's
through.
true. Yeah. Thank goodness.
As
we're not like that. Yeah, we don't ever.
Pretty sure I would have failed all those tests.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so that's why John says no, not the prophet, and he gave a very short answer. He could have given a long answer. You know, your whole idea of prophet is very misguided, and there's a whole different. But no. I have things to do. No, kind of like. It had to be a little bit like when you're trying to do something today and a camera crew shows up, from the news station. It's like, no comment. Go away. All right. So he quoted Isaiah 40, right? Why don't you read to us again what he says? He's showing, I'm fulfilling a role in the Old Testament. It's not Messiah. It's not Elijah. It's not this prophet idea. I am the preparer. So what does he say?
Yeah, he says, I baptize with water. Someone stands among you, but you don't know him. He is the one coming after me, whose sandal strap I'm not worthy to untie.
He is the preparer. Mm-hmm. So that's a reference to Isaiah 40, by the way, that he quotes. And I think of this story. When I think of John the Baptizer, I always think of this story. I love history. I love reading history. So let me read you this story. You ready?
Okay.
Early 1825, William Ashley led a group of mountain men into the Rockies. This is one of the first groups of Ashley's mountain men who transformed the world. They were trying to get their traps set in the American mountains before the British, who were frankly poaching on American land. Almost exactly 200 years ago today, Ashley and his band were trapped. They were trapped in deep snow, and they could not find their way to the west side of the Continental Divide. Suddenly, as they're facing starvation, out of nowhere, a roving, massive herd of buffalo appeared. The bison smashed down 5 feet of snow and made a perfect path forward. Ashley followed. He crossed the divide at a relatively low place that they wouldn't have seen, called Bridger Pass today. And I've driven over it, so have you. I think of that story because John the Baptizer is a buffalo. I mean, he dresses and smells like one. Seriously, he's the preparer, right? And Dr. Blum had a great comment on this. He said, John replied he's not any of the expected prophetic figures. He explained, however, his ministry is described in the Old Testament. He is the voice, and the Greek word he used is phone. While Jesus is the word, John later is going to use this word a lot, logos. Okay, so you've got logos and phone. John's function is phone, the preparation. And that's the quote. I would say voices matter, but they don't matter as much as words. The timbre of Jared's voice is your voice is very pleasant to listen to. It doesn't matter as much as the words you say. Those are what matter. The text is what matters. The logos, Jesus coming, is what mattered. I'm just the voice preparing a way. That's John's answer, and that's future space. So there we go.
Man.
We did part of John 1. First space, second space, third space, future space.
That is
Ta-da!
super interesting.
Cool.
So from now on, we will not have to cover all the introductory stuff.
No.
We
will on occasion to catch people up.
We'll do a summary for sure, but
Yeah.
we won't have to do the in-depth description of what each of these are.
Right.
So they will be shorter in the future.
Praise God.
For sure. But it is good to have that background, and it's good to walk through it as a practice and to consider different angles and different viewpoints and some of the different things that were going on in this text as we read it.
Yep.
So thank you very much.
Oh, what a joy. Thank you. It was fun. See you guys.